York's classic rock, Q1043.
I want to introduce you to Dr. Margaret Cochran. She is a transpersonal psychologist, licensed clinical social worker, educator, and author with more than 20 years of experience under her belt. And I wish I didn't have to talk to Dr. Cochran today, nothing personal, but I wish we didn't have to discuss the murder of Gabby Petito, who grew up in Blue Point. I wish we didn't have to have this conversation. The reason we're having this conversation is that we want to warn other women and men in toxic relationships what to look out for and to leave. So, Dr. Cochran, thank you for joining us. First of all, where are you based?
Thank you for having me. I am in Los Gatos, California.
Nice, nice. So what was your reaction?
Well, my reaction to it was, oh no, not again. I mean, we see this all the time. Domestic abuse like this affects 12 million people a year. 1 in 3 women will be abused. 1 in 4 men will be abused. 4,000 people will die.
Wow. You know, there were warning signs here. There usually are warning signs. One of the disturbing things is what happened with the Utah police, you know, that she was very emotional. They told her to leave a toxic relationship, but they didn't do anything to the perpetrator. What is the problem here?
The problem here is that legally, to some degree, the police's hands are tied. She didn't have marks on her. She didn't have something physical they could photograph and say, here is evidence that this man has done X to her. So I think part of our conversation needs to be about what abuse looks like. Because most of us have it in our head that, okay, you know, there'll be bruises, and sometimes there are. I'm not saying there wouldn't be, but there are a lot of kinds of abuse. There's financial abuse where someone controls all the money and you don't have access to it. And as a result, you don't get to make choices. You don't get to leave if you want to. Another kind is what's called spiritual abuse, where the person attacks, destroys, and denies you access to anything that makes you happy. Friends, clubs, exercise, they control your life completely. Another one would be physical intimidation. And that's one that a lot of people get confused about. You know, the perpetrator throws a phone across the room or threatens and says, yes, if you don't do this, or if you talk about that, I'm going to kill your dog. And here's how I'm going to do it. And they'll take a stuffed animal and just slowly choke it in front of the victim. And of course, the other one is verbal abuse, just constantly assailing the person with negative epithets and messages about how they're incompetent and not lovable and not worthy as persons. And you begin to grind a person down to the point where they do feel that way and they do become convinced that there's no way out. So when you see somebody who, you know, what I saw when I looked at that video, I saw a very beaten young woman, emotionally beaten young woman who'd lost her sense of self entirely and could not imagine being disconnected from this man. And that's what happens.
Do police need to be trained in a different way, or do we need extra help in that type of situation where the police are accompanied by somebody who is trained to do that? I mean, this is a discussion that has been going on, you know, since the killing of George Floyd.
Yes.
Really, as to the role of the police, really, you know, to help in these situations. They're not therapists.
No,
they don't know the warning signs to look for. They know what they are trained to look for. Like you said, signs of physical abuse. But you, as a trained professional, look for something else. And of course, somebody else would say, yes, but who has the money for all this? But what do you think? Where should this discussion start?
Well, this is a situation with no simple answer. Let's say, for example, I had been on the scene with the police officers. Okay, I could have said to them, "This is not what it looks like, folks. This is, some serious abuse going on here." But without physical evidence, they can't arrest somebody. And because I would have no relationship with the victim, and I start just like the one officer tried to talk about, you're in a toxic relationship, you need to get out. That's not enough. It's a complex issue. And as I mentioned earlier, if the person's been beaten down enough, they see no way out. And their identity is so strongly tied to the abuser that they feel like they would have no life, no self, no anything without them. So my having a brief intervention with, gosh, this doesn't look good. I see you, feeling bad, and go through all that. They say, yes, but I love him. That's what you'd hear. And there's nothing the police or I could do to make that happen.
For people who are in relationships now, you talked about the different types of abuse. What are the warning signs we should be looking out for?
Well, one is social isolation. When someone is being abused, they're either avoiding friends and family because they don't want them to see the bruises or the marks, or they just feel so full of self-loathing and fear that they won't go. The other reason for social isolation is often the perpetrator has threatened the victim with, "I will hurt your family. I will, I will kill your family," even to that point. So they just stay away to avoid that. Another one is obviously bruises, black eyes, signs of heavy makeup and heavy clothing to cover injuries on the body. The person may actually talk about being abused. "Oh, this is happening at home." And then when family and friends say, "Please get out, don't stay, don't be there anymore," they'll say, "Oh, but I have to go back. I have no money. I'm nothing without him, her," or, they'll kill the dog. That may sound odd, but a lot of women don't go to shelters because they're not allowed to bring their animals with them. And the perpetrator has said, "If you leave me, I will kill your dog," in the most horrible way possible. So they're afraid.
I'm speaking with Dr. Margaret Cochran. She is a transpersonal psychologist, licensed clinical social worker, educator, and author with 20 years of experience. We're talking about the tragedy of Gabby Petito, the 22-year-old who grew up in Blue Point, who was murdered. What I'm trying to get at here, for those who are dating and in relationships, what are the warning signs they need to look for that they may be with an abuser? And at what point do you leave? Do you leave with the first shoving? Do you leave with the first slap? What do you do?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Physical abuse is never, ever, ever acceptable. And what usually happens in cases like this is profuse apologies. "Oh, I'm so sorry. I just lost control." Or another one is, "I love you so much. I couldn't help myself. I thought I was losing you. So all I could do is beat you up." But that's what you'll hear. So another one is sometimes you'll get warnings from old girlfriends or boyfriends, and the perpetrator will say, "Oh, they're just jealous. They're trying to wreck our love and our relationship." Those things aren't true. But if somebody talks to you about cases of abuse, what's happened to them, and it's very personal to them, you need to take that seriously. The other thing is pay attention to what this person asks of you. Again, I talked before about the warning signs about control and bruises and all that kind of stuff. Pay attention to if your abuser all of a sudden starts to, or your boyfriend, I guess, or girlfriend at the time, before you identify them as that, starts to get controlling about your social media, wants to go through your phone all the time, wants to know where you've been, who you've been talking to, starts to try and control how you dress. your political beliefs, the way that you relate to other people. That is not normal. That is not acceptable. And that, most importantly, to everyone who's listening, that is not love.
I think of Gabby Petito's parents and her step parents. Is there anything they could have done to help her?
Again, a difficult question. It depends on what they were allowed to see. She may have painted the picture of the perfect life to them. They had no suspicion that anything was wrong. And again, that's very common in relationships like this, because there are dire circumstances if you don't, portray everything the way it needs to be. If there were signs, if they'd seen bruises, if they watched her social isolate, if they saw her begin to say a lot of negative things about herself, lose her confidence, yeah, they could have said, hey, what's going on? I see changes in you. I'm concerned about you. And more than likely what they would get in the beginning is a brush off. Oh, I'm fine. It's okay. Don't worry, all that kind of thing. But you gently, lovingly, and empathically persist. Something's not right, honey. You're not your usual self. Let's go talk to somebody. Let's go see, if we can't make you feel better, because I'm concerned. You seem tired all the time. You don't come over anymore. Those kinds of things. But if you, as the concerned family member or friend, start to get really assertive and pushy about it, you're going to just make them go away. It has to be gentle and persistent, unless you find the person beaten and bloodied and you have to pick them up and take them to the hospital. And of course, with the laws written the way they are, those of us in physical health care are required to report these kind of cases, because often the abused will not press charges.
What was interesting about the advice you were just giving to loved ones of victims of abuse, you were not focusing on the abuser. You were focusing the advice to be given to the abused. Because,
Yes.
My immediate reaction was, as a parent, if one of my children was in this situation and you're saying, but look at this person you're involved with, of course you're going to be, they're going to resist that. Of course they're going to defend. So it was very interesting to me that you take it from the perspective of, well, something doesn't seem right with you. And
Yes.
that gentle guidance, that makes a lot of sense to me.
Well, there are three very important defenses involved in situations like this: rationalization, minimization, and denial. And those three defenses prop up your connection to the abuser. And so the technique that I used slips underneath those defenses. There's nothing to defend. I'm just expressing my love and concern for you. And, again, depending on how deeply enmeshed you are with the person that's hurting you, you'll probably say, no, it's okay. I'm just, tired or whatever. But that's where the gentle persistence and the continuing to gently push for more social contact. Oh, come over, honey. Let's go do this, or let's do this with the children, because the more you can get the person away from the abuser and see what the rest of the world looks like, it helps them return to normal to some degree. I've worked some cases where people were literally in bondage to the abuser, literally tied up, kept under the bed, and in this particular case I'm thinking about right now, of course, I'm disguising details to some degree, but they were literally physically in bondage. Slowly over time, the abuser, the person went in, by the way, the person went into the abuser's home as a nanny. And so slowly but surely, as she was abused, she told her parents the story that now she was going to be a live-in nanny, and everything was fine. So he had her tied up under the bed and was doing all sorts of unpleasant things to her. But over time, he got used to her. He began to kind of trust her. And so he wouldn't tie her up during the day. And then eventually she persuaded him to let her go to church. And that's where she got help. she went to the pastor and said, I have to live tied up under a bed, and this man is doing these things to me. And he's the one who, but she was so brainwashed. And I've got tons of stories like that. Certainly men are physically abused as well. I don't want to disregard that, but young women are often brainwashed and mesmerized into, I have to do this. And they become impregnated, which tends to strengthen those ties. I can't leave, I have a baby. He's threatened to take the children away from me. I mean, all kinds of dreadful things that keep the person tied and bonded to the abuser. And women and men of color are disproportionately represented in this population. And it's so important that we're having a national conversation about this, to understand that it's not just people we're used to seeing on the internet or on television who get abused. There are lots of people out there who need help.
I want to thank you, Dr. Margaret Cochran, transpersonal psychologist, licensed clinical social worker, educator, and author. And if you need, there is a domestic abuse hotline. Here's the number,
Yes.
800-799-SAFE. That's 800-799-SAFE. And when we come back, we're going to meet a Q listener who has donated an incredible $15,000 to the wonderful Tunnel to Towers organization. Next, Q104.3.
New York's classic rock, Q104.3.